Hello, and welcome back to another evening together. Wherever you are right now, tucked up in bed, stretched out on the sofa, somewhere quiet with the lights low, I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad we get to spend a bit of time with Dexter tonight, because tonight's video is a different kind of companion to the show. We're not going back through the plot. We're not ranking the seasons or relitigating the finale, though I promise you that conversation will come. Tonight is something a little more relaxed than that. Tonight, we're going through 200 facts, details, Easter eggs, and hidden pieces of information about Dexter, the full franchise. From that first 2006 pilot, all the way through to everything that's been announced and aired right up to the present. 200 things. Some of them you'll know, some you probably won't, and some of them I think will change the way you see moments you've already watched a dozen times. I should say up front. This isn't a quiz. You don't need to be taking notes. The whole point is that this is easy company for a quiet evening. Think of it less like a documentary and more like sitting with someone who spent a genuinely embarrassing amount of time reading about this show and who wants to share some of what they've found. That's more or less what this channel is, to be honest. If you're new here, a quick word about what we do. This is a channel dedicated to long, slow, detailed companion content about shows worth caring about. We go deep, we go slow, and we try to make it feel like good company rather than a lecture. If that sounds like something you'd want more of, the subscribe button is right there, and it would mean a great deal. Now, get comfortable, settle in. Let's start at the very beginning, which in the case of Dexter means going back to a novel published in 2004, a television pilot that was almost derailed by 3 different hurricanes, and a decision to put a serial killer at the center of a story and ask audiences to root for him, which, as it turned out, they were absolutely willing to do. The first thing worth knowing about Dexter, the thing that often gets glossed over in favor of talking about the show itself, is that it began as a novel. Jeff Lindsay published Darkly Dreaming Dexter in 2004, and it introduced the character in a form that was recognizable but also quite different from what ended up on screen. The novel is pulpier, funnier in a darker way, and eventually goes somewhere the television series had the good sense to avoid. But we'll get to that. The television adaptation was developed by James Manos Jr. Now, the name might not ring a bell immediately, but if you know your prestige television, you might know his other work. Manos Jr. wrote College, the episode of The Sopranos where Tony takes Meadow on a university tour and quietly strangles an EFFBI informant in the same trip. It's widely considered one of the finest episodes of that series and one of the finest hours of American television, full stop. So when he turned his hand to adapting a novel about a serial killer with a code of honor, there was already a certain amount of earned trust in the room. The pilot was directed by Michael Cuesta, and it actually began filming in Miami, which matters because, as we'll get into later, very little of the show was filmed in Miami after that. The problem was that production coincided with an extraordinarily active hurricane season. Katrina, Rita, and Wilma all arrived in quick succession, causing insurance complications and forcing parts of the production to relocate. The pilot survived it, and it aired on October 1st, 2006. Showtime reported that it attracted over 1 million viewers, the highest series premiere ratings the network had seen in nearly 2 years. One of the quietly significant technical facts about that first season is that it was shot on 35mm film. Every subsequent season switched to digital. If you've ever rewatched season 1 and noticed something slightly different about it, a texture, a grain, a certain quality to the shadows that feels more cinematic, that's why. The move to digital from season 2 onward gave the show a cleaner, slicker look. Not worse necessarily, but different. Season 1 has a weight to it that's partly craft and partly the medium it was captured on. The show being on Showtime rather than a broadcast network is worth pausing on for a moment. The TVMA rating meant the writers could go to places a network drama simply couldn't. And given that the central premise involves watching a serial killer perform ritualistic murders with some regularity, that freedom was not incidental to the show's identity. It's woven into everything, the gore, the moral complexity, the way the show refuses to apologize for what it is. There's a wonderful little footnote here too. The premise was partly inspired by a real person, Pedro Rodrigues Filho, known as Pedrinho Matador in Brazil, was a serial killer who exclusively targeted other criminals, murderers, rapists, gang members. He became a kind of folk vigilante figure in certain communities, and the parallel to Dexter's code is close enough that it appears to have genuinely informed how Lindsay conceived the character. I find that detail fascinating because it means the show's central moral tension, can a killer be a good person if they only kill the guilty, is one that real life has already asked and not given a clean answer to. Now, in Lindsay's novels, the dark passenger, the internal force that drives Dexter's compulsions, eventually develops supernatural implications. It's implied to be something closer to a demon, an actual entity rather than a metaphor. The television series made an early and entirely correct decision to keep the dark passenger psychological. Rooted in trauma, in childhood, in the specific horror of what Dexter witnessed as a toddler. The supernatural route would have changed the moral stakes completely. If Dexter is possessed, he's a victim. If Dexter is simply who he is, a product of nature and of Harry's very deliberate nurture, then the show gets to ask harder questions. Lindsay went on to write 8 novels in the series, ending with Dexter is Dead in 2015. The television show diverged almost entirely from the books after season 1, which gave both the novels and the series room to breathe separately. There's one more origin story worth mentioning before we move forward, and it involves CBS of all things. During the 2007-08 Writers Guild of America strike, edited reruns of Dexter Season 1 were broadcast on CBS beginning February 17, 2008. Heavily censored, the graphic language and violence trimmed down to earn a TV 14 rather than TV MA rating, but broadcast to a genuinely national audience who would never have found the show otherwise. The Parents Television Council protested, which in a certain light reads as the best free advertising a prestige cable drama could hope for. The CBS broadcasts introduced a huge new wave of viewers to a show that was already building genuine cultural momentum. The production companies credited across the franchise are varied: the Colleton Company, John Goldwyn Productions, 801 Productions, Devilina Productions, and eventually Paramount Television Studios, among others. Devilina Productions is my personal favorite of those, if only because the name sounds like it was invented for this show specifically, which it wasn't, but you can see why it fits. The show was developed not as a reboot of anything, not as a continuation of any prior screen property, but as the first television incarnation of a character that a novelist had invented just 2 years before. It's a relatively short runway from page to screen, and it's one of the more successful ones in recent television history. Something else worth noting about the early history of the show is how deliberate the decision to stay grounded was. Lindsay's novels eventually introduced a supernatural dimension to the dark passenger concept. The idea that what drives Dexter isn't trauma and psychology, but something external, an entity, almost a parasitic presence from another plane. It's a choice that makes a certain kind of sense for pulp horror fiction. It removes moral agency from the protagonist in a way that allows for some interesting storytelling angles. But the television show made a clean decision very early. Everything that Dexter is explicable. It's childhood trauma, it's Harry's intervention, it's the specific combination of what he witnessed and what he was subsequently taught. That groundedness is what allowed the show to function as a genuine moral drama rather than a supernatural thriller, and I think it's one of the most consequential creative decisions in the show's development. There's also the matter of James Manos Jr.'s departure after the pilot. He wrote the pilot teleplay, established the visual and tonal language of the series, and then stepped back. Clyde Phillips took over as showrunner from season 1, and the development of the show from that point was primarily Phillips' work. It's one of those handoffs where the person who built the foundation isn't the person who built the house. and somehow it worked, which is more than you can say for most television handoffs of that kind. The show was also genuinely innovative in terms of its network context. Before Dexter, Showtime had prestige credentials, it had produced good work, but it hadn't produced anything that commanded the level of cultural conversation that The Sopranos and The Wire were generating for HBO. Dexter changed that. It was the series that put Showtime in a different category of ambition. And it did so not by being the most complex or the most formally ambitious show on television, but by finding a character so specific and so morally interesting that you couldn't look away. One more detail from the production history that I find interesting. The original title sequence brief didn't specify that it needed to feel sinister. The decision to film it as a morning routine, to make it look completely normal, was taken in the knowledge that context would do the unsettling work. The audience was told they were watching a serial killer, and then they watched him make breakfast, and their minds did the rest. That's quite a sophisticated understanding of how audience knowledge shapes perception, built into the very first thing you see in every single episode. Since we've been talking about how the show came to be, let's talk about the people who made it what it was. Because the casting of Dexter is one of those things that, in retrospect, feels completely inevitable, and yet it absolutely wasn't. Michael C. Hall came to the role best known as David Fisher in 6 Feet Under. And the interesting thing about that, the thing worth sitting with for a moment, is how different those two characters are on the surface. David Fisher is quietly tortured by grief and identity, and the weight of running a family funeral home. He's a man who is always, on some level, surrounded by death and performing a kind of normalcy around it, which, now that I say it out loud, is not actually that different from Dexter Morgan. Hall clearly has a gift for men who are managing something enormous beneath the surface. The specific texture of that management was different, but the architecture of the performance was already there. For the first 6 seasons of the original series, Hall was earning $295,000 per episode. By the time the show reached seasons 7 and 8, that figure had risen to $830,000 per episode. His total payout for the original series exceeded $41 million. Those numbers tell you something about how the economics of premium cable had shifted over the course of the show's run, and about how completely Hall had become identified with the character. There was, for a period, no separating the two. Now, there is a fact about season 4 that I think deserves more attention than it typically gets. During the production of what most people consider the greatest season of the series, the Trinity season, the John Lithgow season, the season with the most devastating finale in the show's history, Michael C. Hall was secretly being treated for Hodgkin's lymphoma. He had been diagnosed but kept the information private while continuing to work. The makeup and wardrobe departments quietly adjusted to mask his physical changes throughout the production. He wore a hat to the Golden Globes in 2010, where he won Best Actor in a Drama Series, and when he mentioned his diagnosis during his acceptance speech, it was genuinely news to much of the audience. Think about that for a second, that the performance most people cite as his finest work was delivered while he was fighting a serious illness he hadn't told anyone about. There's also the matter of his marriage to Jennifer Carpenter, who played Deborah, Dexter's adoptive sister on the show. They were married in 2008 and divorced in 2011 during the show's run. They continued to work together through season 8. I'm not going to dwell on the personal side of it, that's their business, but the professional dimension is genuinely interesting. Playing siblings with all the intimacy and tension and history that entails, while navigating a marriage and then a divorce in real life. The performances, particularly in the later seasons when Deborah's relationship with Dexter becomes so much more complicated, carry a certain lived-in quality that I've always thought went beyond craft. Hall received 5 Emmy nominations for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series across the show's run. He won the Golden Globe in 2010 and the SAG Award that same year. But the Emmy somehow never came. It's one of those Emmy anomalies that gets less surprising the more you think about how the Emmy voting process works. but it's still a bit of a strange footnote to a performance that defined a decade of television. Jennifer Carpenter's salary in the final seasons reached around $300,000 per episode, which gives you some sense of how much the show valued Deborah as a character. And rightly so, she's arguably the emotional spine of the series in a way that's easy to undervalue because her arc is less outwardly spectacular than Dexter's. John Lithgow as Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity killer in Season 4, is the guest performance that tends to come up first in any conversation about the show's best work. He won the Emmy for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series and the Golden Globe for Supporting Actor. Both of those were entirely deserved. Lithgow brought a specific kind of terrifying domesticity to Arthur that made him feel genuinely plausible in a way that some of the show's later antagonists didn't quite manage. Jimmy Smits played Miguel Prado across approximately 12 episodes of Season 3. Julia Stiles was Golden Globe nominated for her portrayal of Lumen Pierce in Season 5, a performance that I think is somewhat underappreciated in the broader conversation about the show's best seasons. Keith Carradine played FBI Special Agent Frank Lundy in both Seasons 2 and 4, and there's something quietly sad about his reappearance in Season 4, a character the show seemed to bring back specifically to take away again. James Remar as Harry Morgan spent most of his screen time in scenes that were technically flashbacks or hallucinations, which is an unusual way to be a series regular, but he carried it with real steadiness. The physicality he brought to Harry, authoritative, controlled, genuinely loving in a way that complicated everything, gave Dexter's origin story a weight it needed. Eric King as James Dokes became a fan favorite in a way the show perhaps didn't fully anticipate. Dokes was the one person at Miami Metro who actually saw Dexter clearly, who wasn't fooled by the performance of normalcy. His departure at the end of Season 2 was a structural necessity, but it left a gap that no subsequent antagonist within the department ever quite filled. A few other casting notes worth mentioning. Christian Camargo played Brian Moser, the ice truck killer, in Season 1 and returned as a vision or hallucination in later seasons. Yvonne Strahovski went from playing Hannah Mukai in Seasons 7 and 8 to starring in The Handmaid's Tale, which says something about the caliber of actor the show was attracting. And Ray Stevenson, who played Isaac Sierko in Season 7, passed away in 2023, a reminder of how much time has passed since these seasons aired, and how many of the people involved in them are no longer with us. Let's talk about the supporting cast in a bit more depth, because there are some details in the ensemble that don't get as much attention as the leading performances. C.S. Lee as Vince Masuku started out as a recurring character in Season 1 and was promoted to main cast status beginning in Season 2. His credit moved into the opening titles. Masuku functions as comic relief in a fairly technical sense, inappropriate, irreverent, fond of saying exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong moment. But he also does something more quietly important, which is that he provides a consistent tonal counterweight to the heaviness of the central storyline. Every time the show risks taking itself too seriously, Masuku is usually around to puncture it gently. Desmond Harrington joined as Quinn in Season 3 as a recurring character and was promoted to main cast status in Season 4. He stayed through the end of the original run. Quinn's arc over the series is an interesting one. He starts as a morally gray detective who we're encouraged to view with mild suspicion, and ends up as one of the more straightforwardly decent people in the building. His relationship with Deborah, particularly in the middle seasons, has a warmth to it that the show used well. Jeff Pearson's Tom Matthews, Deputy Chief Matthews, authority figure, occasional obstacle, occasional reluctant ally, was a recurring presence across most of the series, and was elevated to main cast status in Season 7. It's a small but telling fact. The show was still making structural decisions about its ensemble as late as Season 7, still adjusting the weight of its characters based on what the story needed. Lauren Velez played Maria Laguertu from Season 1 through her death in Season 7, and the character's arc is one of the show's most significant secondary narratives. Fluidscape starts as something close to a bureaucratic antagonist, self-interested, politically motivated, willing to manage evidence for her own advancement. Over time, she becomes more complex, and her decision in Season 7 to pursue the Bay Harbor Butcher case against the institutional grain, following evidence that nobody else was following, makes her the most morally straightforward detective in the building by the end of her life. The tragedy of Fluidscape is that she was right, and she died for it. There's also the question of Amy Garcia, who joined as Jamie Batistu in Season 6 as a recurring character. She's Angel Batistu's sister, and she serves primarily as Harrison's nanny and caregiver across the later seasons, a functional role that the show gave her gradually more dimension. Her elevation to main cast in Season 8 was a recognition that her character had become structurally load-bearing in a way the earlier seasons hadn't planned for. Now let's talk about something that doesn't come up as often as it should, which is where Dexter was actually made. Because the answer for most of its run is not Miami. The show is set in Miami. The setting is fundamental. The heat, the light, the particular quality of Florida's geography, the way the water is always somewhere nearby. And yet the majority of the original series was filmed in and around Los Angeles, California, a residential neighborhood in Long Beach, apparently known to locals in that area as Los Altos, served as the primary stand-in for the pastel-colored, palm-lined streets of South Florida. They brought in the right plants, the right light, the right kind of stucco architecture, and made it work. Bay Harbor Islands in actual Miami provided the exterior shots of Dexter's apartment building, so that specific location is real, and fans do still visit it. But beyond that, in certain establishing shots in the pilot, the Miami you're watching for most of the series is Southern California. The fact that it's convincing is a testament to the production design team, who were essentially building a fictional version of a real place in an entirely different state. The pilot made more use of genuine Miami locations than any subsequent season. The reason the production moved primarily to Los Angeles after that, logistics, costs, the infrastructure of the Los Angeles film industry, the studio facilities available there, is entirely practical. But it does add a certain irony to a show that leans so heavily on the specific atmosphere of its setting. The saturation, the brightness, the constant impression of heat pressing down on everything, all of that was constructed rather than found. Which brings me to Dexter. New Blood, because the location situation there was quite different and quite specific. New Blood was set in the fictional small town of Iron Lake, New York. Iron Lake is not a real place. The town that played it on screen was Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, a village with a population of roughly 2,800 people in Franklin County. It's a genuinely beautiful location, all covered bridges and autumn foliage, and the kind of quiet that feels very far from Miami. The production did a thorough job of transforming it into Iron Lake, and the shift in geography from the original series was deliberate. The cold, the snow, the compression of small-town life after the sprawl of Miami, all of that was doing narrative work. New Blood was also filmed during COVID-19 protocols in 2021, which added logistical complexity to an already demanding location shoot. And it introduced a new aspect ratio, 21.9 ultra-wide, which creates that letterboxed look on standard displays. The original series had used a conventional 16.9. Dexter, Original Sin, the prequel set in 1991 Miami, used 18.9 as a kind of middle ground. The 21.9 choice for New Blood and subsequently for Resurrection was intentional, a signal that these were cinematic, prestige-level productions rather than television in the traditional sense. Whether you find the letterboxing immersive or slightly irritating probably depends on what you're watching it on. On a more technical level, Season 1's use of 35mm film, which we touched on briefly, gave it a different visual weight than anything that came after. From Season 2 onward, the show moved to digital formats, and while the production maintained a consistent visual identity, bright, saturated, Miami daylight heavy, The texture of the image was never quite the same. It's a small thing, but if you watch season 1 and then jump straight into season 2, you can feel it. The cinematographers who worked across the series, including Terry Stacy and Romeo Tyrone, maintained that aesthetic continuity across multiple seasons and different directors. That's not easy work. The show had a specific look, and preserving it across 8 seasons with various directors and 2 different cameras formats required real consistency of vision. One last production note, and it's my favorite. A prop printer appeared in a season 6 scene, a printer from the fictional company Sabre, which is the company introduced in The Office as a corporate buyer of Dunder Mifflin. It's a background prop. It's blink and you miss it. Nobody addresses it. But someone in the props department put it there. And at some point, a very attentive viewer spotted it, and now it lives in the folklore of both shows simultaneously. That's a proper Easter egg, the kind that requires both a decision to plant it and a specific kind of dedicated viewer to find it. The logistics of making Los Angeles look like Miami are worth dwelling on for a moment because they're more considerable than you might assume. Miami has a specific quality of light, flat, bright, almost bleaching, the kind that bounces off water and pale concrete and makes everything look slightly overexposed. Southern California has its own version of that, but it's different. The show's production designers made choices about color, about building materials, about the specific geometry of neighborhood streets that collectively pushed the LAA footage into something that could plausibly be read as Florida. The Krusty Krab, wrong show, apologies. The point is, the production design team also had to deal with the challenge of Miami's specific relationship with water. Miami is a coastal city. The ocean and the bay are not incidental to it. They're fundamental to the geography, to the economy, to the culture. And Dexter's body disposal methodology depends on water. The Bay Harbor Butcher dump site, the many episodes featuring Dexter's boat, The Slice of Life, the way water functions throughout the show as both setting and as a space where the rules of ordinary life don't apply, all of that required careful production management when the actual filming location was landlocked suburban Los Angeles. The Slice of Life specifically is worth a moment. It's Dexter's boat, and it functions almost as a secondary character across the series, the place where he is most completely himself, where the performance of normalcy isn't required. Sequences on or around the boat have a different quality to them than the Miami metro scenes. The boat represents freedom and disposal in equal measure. It's a practical tool and a psychological one. The production found actual marina locations in the Los Angeles area that could credibly double as Miami Harbor, and by keeping the framing tight and the horizon consistent, they made it work. New Blood's use of Shelburne Falls was interesting for different reasons. The town was small enough that the production could effectively transform significant portions of it. Iron Lake needs to feel like a complete place, a town with a history and a social structure and the particular claustrophobia of small-town life, where everyone knows everyone's business, and secrets don't stay secret for long. Shelburne Falls, with its covered bridges and its autumn colors and its main street that still feels like a main street, provided all of that. It gave the production something that a generic small-town set wouldn't have: genuine texture. There are television title sequences, and then there are television title sequences that become genuinely iconic, things that exist in the cultural memory long after the show itself has finished airing. Dexter's opening belongs in that second category. And because we're talking facts and details tonight, let's give it the attention it actually deserves. The main title theme, simply called Dexter Main Title, was composed by Rolf Kent. Kent is a working television and film composer, and this particular piece of music became the most distinctive thing he'd ever write. It's brief, it's deceptively simple, and it works because of what it's paired with rather than despite it. The theme plays over a morning routine. Dexter waking up, making breakfast, preparing for the day, eggs cracking, coffee percolating, flossing, which becomes uncomfortable to watch in a way that regular flossing never is because you've already absorbed who you're looking at. The visual trick of the sequence is that every action is entirely mundane and entirely unambiguous. He's just getting ready for work. And yet the framing, the close-ups, the slow pace, the particular attention to certain textures makes it feel predatory. The egg is not just an egg, the knife is not just a knife. Nothing is violent, nothing is graphic, and yet the cumulative effect is deeply unsettling. It won an Emmy in 2007 for Outstanding Main Title Design, which it absolutely deserved. The same year, the show won a second Emmy, Outstanding Single Camera Picture Editing for a Drama Series. 2 Emmys in the first year, both for craft rather than performance, which tells you something about how seriously the production took the technical and aesthetic dimensions of the show from the beginning. What I find genuinely remarkable about the title sequence is that it ran unchanged across all 8 seasons of the original series. Different showrunners came and went. The tone of the show shifted quite significantly over the years. The cast changed, the villains changed, the moral stakes evolved, and the opening remained exactly the same. There's something almost stubborn about that, and I mean that as a compliment. It was a statement of identity that the production refused to revise, no matter what was happening in the episodes that followed it. Daniel Licht composed the score throughout the original series, while Pat Irwin scored Dexter: New Blood. His music is described as eerie and Latin-influenced, and that combination, sinister undertones married to the rhythms of Miami, gave the show its particular sound. The Latin percussion and brass placed you geographically even when the visuals were shot in Long Beach. Multiple soundtrack albums of his work were commercially released, which is a fairly rare thing for a television drama and speaks to how much the music was appreciated as a standalone piece of work. Daniel Licht passed away, and for Dexter: Resurrection, composing duties were taken over by Pat Irwin. That transition is one of those quiet continuity breaks in the franchise that doesn't always get mentioned, but matters to the texture of the shows. There were companion podcasts produced for the show, an official Dexter wrap-up podcast during the original run, featuring cast and crew breaking down episodes, and a second podcast for New Blood, hosted by executive producer Scott Reynolds. These are fairly niche pieces of franchise history now, but at the time they were part of a broader conversation around a show that had cultivated a deeply engaged audience. The title theme is, I think, the best single argument for what the show understood about itself. It knew it was asking something of the audience, asking them to invest in a man who kills people, and it opened every episode by reframing the mundane as potentially sinister. Not through gore or darkness, but through attention. Just by looking very carefully at ordinary things and asking you to consider what you might be missing. That's a fairly elegant statement of intent for 90 seconds of television. The music detail I keep returning to is how thoroughly the Latin percussion in Daniel Licht's score compensated for the fact that the show was being filmed primarily in Los Angeles. You can do a lot with image, with color, with production design, but sound places you somewhere in a way that's harder to fake. Licht's score was saturated with Miami. The rhythms, the instrumentation, the way the music moved between anxiety and something almost sensuous. It put you in a specific place at a specific temperature, and it did so consistently across almost the entire run of the franchise. Rolf Kent, who wrote the title theme, has an interesting career parallel to the show itself. He's worked across film and television, and Dexter Main Title is by far the most widely recognized piece of music he's written, which is genuinely funny if you think about it. A piece of music written to accompany a man flossing his teeth has become one of the most memorable theme compositions in the history of television drama. The wrap-up podcasts that accompanied the show during its original run were part of a broader ecosystem of fan engagement that Showtime built around Dexter. This was the era when the apparatus of television fandom was changing dramatically, when fan wikis and recap culture and official companion content were becoming standard parts of how a prestige drama existed in the world. Dexter was among the first shows to fully embrace that ecosystem. The show's online presence, the companion podcasts, the way individual episode revelations were managed and discussed, all of it helped build the sense that Dexter was a shared project between the production and its audience, rather than simply a product being delivered to them. Let me now take us back to where it all began in terms of the actual story, because the first 2 seasons contain some details that are easy to forget but worth revisiting slowly. The ice truck killer, let's start there. The central mystery of season 1 is built around a killer who leaves bloodless, perfectly dismembered crime scenes, which is, of course, a message constructed specifically for Dexter. Not for Miami Metro. The ice truck killer's crime scenes are for the public. For Dexter personally, the cases are staging, elaborately arranged to communicate with someone who understands them. And the reason the killer understands Dexter well enough to do this is eventually revealed to be the central gut punch of season 1. The ice truck killer is Brian Moser, Dexter's biological brother. Both brothers were present when their mother, Laura Moser, was murdered by a chainsaw in a shipping container when they were very young children. Dexter was found 2 days later, sitting in the blood, too young to form conscious memories of the event, but marked by it permanently. Brian was old enough to remember clearly, and the divergence between what the trauma did to each of them, Dexter found by a police officer who gave him a code, Brian left to the foster system without that structure, is one of the more genuinely moving ideas in the show's first season. 2 children, the same horror, completely different outcomes. Season 1 is the only season that followed Jeff Lindsay's source novel closely in terms of plot. After that, the television series went its own way. It picked up the character and the world and the moral framework, and then it went somewhere the books didn't. The season 1 premiere gave Showtime its highest series ratings in nearly 2 years, which set expectations and made the renewal decision straightforward. The season averaged approximately 2 million viewers per episode when DVR viewing was factored in, which for a premium cable drama in 2006 was genuinely significant. Both Season 1 and Season 2 were selected by the American Film Institute as among the 10 best television programs of their respective years. He wore a hat to the Golden Globes in 2010, where he won Best Actor in a Drama Series, and he mentioned his diagnosis during his acceptance speech after publicly revealing it just days earlier. That's a meaningful endorsement. James Dokes. I have a lot of time for James Dokes, and I suspect you do too. Sergeant Dokes at Miami Metro is, to my mind, the most competent detective in the building across the show's entire run, which is both a compliment to him and a mild indictment of everyone else. He first suspects Dexter not because of a tip or a piece of forensic evidence surprise Motherford Yarrer, which he delivers to Dexter in Season 1 upon catching him in the act, became one of the most quoted lines in television history, and refuses to accept the performance at face value. Surprise motherfuckers, in which he delivers to Dexter in Season 2 upon catching him in the act, became one of the most quoted lines in television history. The Season 7 finale was later named after it, which is one of the nicer callbacks the show ever managed. Dokes' fate in Season 2 is, in some ways, the original series' most efficient piece of storytelling. Leela West, Dexter's Narcotics Anonymous sponsor, who becomes a full antagonist by the end of the season, orchestrates a cabin explosion that kills Dokes and, crucially, frames him posthumously as the Bay Harbor Butcher. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation was the result of divers discovering Dexter's underwater body dump, bags of dismembered victims he'd been accumulating for years. In any real investigation, the idea that a single detective at the very department investigating these murders would conveniently be revealed as the killer just before being blown up would raise some fairly significant procedural questions. And yet, Miami Metro accepts it, the FBI accepts it, and Dexter is free. Leela West, played by Jamie Murray, is one of the show's more underrated antagonists. She functions partly as a dark mirror and partly as a cautionary tale. What Dexter's impulses look like without the code and without Harry, without the framework that makes them navigable. Dexter ultimately tracks her to Paris and kills her there, which is a detail I always liked. He doesn't do it in Miami. He follows the threat to its source across the Atlantic and removes it cleanly. Season 2 holds the highest Rotten Tomatoes score of any Dexter season at 96%. That's a remarkable number for any television drama, and it reflects a season that was operating at genuine creative confidence. The Bay Harbor Butcher storyline forced the show to put real procedural pressure on its protagonist in a way that felt earned rather than contrived. Special Agent Frank Lundy, played with great authority by Keith Carradine, was a credible threat, a smart investigator who came genuinely close to the truth through legitimate detective work. And then there's the Harry revelation in Season 2, which changes everything retroactively. It's revealed that Harry Morgan, the architect of Dexter's code, the surrogate father, the moral framework, took his own life. He saw what he had created. He saw Dexter's first kill by some accounts, and the weight of what he'd shaped was too much. That revelation sits differently every time you watch Season 1 knowing it. Harry isn't just a guide, he's a man who lived with the consequences of his guidance and couldn't. The Brian Moser reveal in Season 1 remains, for my money, one of the better first-season twists in prestige television. The reason it works is that the show had been so committed to Dexter's isolation, his sense of being fundamentally alone, of being something that doesn't exist elsewhere, that the introduction of a biological mirror made narrative sense as well as emotional sense. Of course there was another one. Of course trauma, that profound, had two products. What's interesting about Brian is that he functions as a road not taken. Harry found Dexter first, and Harry gave him the code. Nobody found Brian. Nobody channeled his compulsions into something structured. He grew up in the foster system and became exactly what Dexter might have become without Harry's intervention. The show makes that comparison explicit, and it's one of the reasons Season 1 has such a clean moral architecture. The question it's asking, can structure substitute for humanity, is laid out clearly in the contrast between the two brothers. The revelation of Harry's suicide is the second great gut punch of the show's early seasons, and it functions differently from the Brian Moser reveal. The Moser reveal is a surprise about the external world. There's a character we didn't know about. Harry's suicide is a revelation about interiority. A character we thought we understood completely was carrying something much heavier than the show had shown us. The retrospective weight of that information is enormous. Every scene of Harry teaching Dexter the code now carries the question: was Harry trying to shape a functional human being, or was he trying to manage his own guilt about what he'd created? Season 2's Bay Harbor. Butcher Investigation holds up remarkably well as a piece of procedural television precisely because it treats Lundy as a genuinely competent investigator. In any real law enforcement situation, an EFFBI agent assigned to a serial killer investigation would bring significant resources, significant expertise, and significant patience. Lundy had all three. The reason Dexter escaped wasn't because Lundy was incompetent, it was because circumstances intervened. Dokes was available as a convenient alternative suspect, and Lila removed him with terrible efficiency. The show didn't ask you to believe Dexter outsmarted the investigation. It asked you to believe he got very lucky. And now we arrive at what most people agree, or at least most people who care about this sort of thing agree, was the summit. Seasons 3 and 4, the Miguel Prado season and the Trinity season. And while Season 3 is the lesser of the two, it plants seeds that Season 4 harvests with devastating efficiency. Season 3 introduced Miguel Prado, played by Jimmy Smits, as an assistant district attorney who stumbles into knowledge of Dexter's secret and responds not with horror but with fascination. He wants in. He sees a partnership, a legally protected killing machine operating under the cover of law enforcement. And Dexter, for reasons that reveal something important about his loneliness, is briefly tempted by it. Miguel represents the show asking, what if Dexter got what he always said he wanted, which is someone who knows him completely and accepts him? The answer, of course, is that Miguel doesn't actually want to follow the code. He wants to use it. When his targets start becoming personal enemies, legal rivals, people he simply wants removed, the arrangement unravels. Dexter kills him with something that reads in the performance as genuine grief, which is interesting. Miguel was a lesson about the difference between being known and being understood. Season 3 also featured Rita's pregnancy and Dexter's marriage proposal, both of which were narrative events that the show knew were burdening its protagonist with something that would eventually require a terrible resolution. The domesticity of it all. Dexter trying to be a husband and a stepfather and a serial killer simultaneously was always headed somewhere. The question was how bad it would get. Season 4 is where it got as bad as it could. John Lithgow as Arthur Mitchell, the Tranquillity killer, is a performance that I genuinely believe belongs in any conversation about the great television performances of the 2000s. Arthur isn't monstrous in the obvious way. He's monstrous in the way that's much harder to look away from. He presents perfectly. He has a family, a church, a volunteer building program for a Ford. His kill pattern follows a specific sequence: a boy buried alive in cement, a woman bled out in a bathtub, a coerced suicide by jumping, and a father bludgeoned, repeated cyclically over the course of his adult life, different from everyone around him. The horror is how thoroughly he isn't. His kill pattern follows a specific sequence: drowning, stabbing, bludgeoning, repeated cyclically over the course of his adult life. He had been killing for approximately 30 years before Dexter found him. Think about that for a second. In any real forensic investigation, an active serial killer with a consistent methodology and a 3-decade timeline would leave a great deal of evidence. Arthur simply didn't, or the evidence was there and wasn't connected. The show doesn't dwell on this and doesn't need to. The point isn't procedural play. He approaches under the alias Kyle Butler, a name that later sends Arthur on a deadly search through Miami in one of Season 4's neater ironies, and tries to understand how Arthur holds it all together. He approaches under the alias Kyle Butler, the same name Arthur had been using for his own covert operations in one of Season 4's neater ironies, and tries to understand how Arthur holds it all together. How he is both the perfect family man and the relentless killer. Dexter wants the blueprint. During the production of all of this, during the filming of what would become the most critically praised season of the series, Michael C. Hall was being treated for Ho-He. He won the Golden Globe and the Seiji Award for his performance in it, and had already announced his diagnosis before his acceptance speech and makeup, and his co-workers protected the information. He completed the season, he won the Golden Globe and the SAG Award for his performance in it, and announced his diagnosis during his acceptance speech. The discipline required to do that, to deliver that performance while managing that diagnosis, and to maintain both with that level of quiet, is genuinely extraordinary. The Season 4 finale, The Getaway, set a Showtime viewership record at the time, 2.6 million viewers, the most watched original series episode in the network's history at that point. Steve Schill directed it and won the Emmy for Outstanding Directing for a Drama Series. It remains the only Dexter episode to win that award. The finale ends with Dexter finding Rita, his wife, murdered in the bathtub by Arthur Mitchell. Their infant son Harrison is sitting in the blood on the floor beside her. The parallel is exact and merciless. Dexter was found as a toddler sitting in his murdered mother's blood in a shipping container. Harrison is now sitting in his murdered mother's blood in a bathtub. The cycle hasn't broken. It's reproduced itself one generation forward with mechanical precision. John Lithgow appeared in that finale, having already been killed by Dexter earlier in the episode. He reprised the role of Arthur Mitchell as a hallucination in Dexter, New Blood, more than a decade later. The image of Trinity is one the franchise clearly doesn't want to fully release. Clyde Phillips, the showrunner who had overseen seasons 1 through 4, departed after season 4. The peak of the show and the exit of the architect of that peak happened simultaneously, This is the kind of thing that, in retrospect, you can see as the hinge point. The moment things begin to move in a different direction. There's a scene in season 4, I've been thinking about it through most of this video, where Dexter is at one of Arthur Mitchell's 4 Walls volunteer builds. Arthur has handed Dexter a hammer, the same hammer, it's implied, that Arthur has used as a murder weapon. And Dexter takes it and nails a beam into place, standing beside Arthur at a house being built for someone who needs affordable shelter. They're building something, they're doing visible, measurable good, and one of them is using that moment as a cover for what he actually is, and the other one is watching him and thinking, I want what he has. That's a scene that tells you everything about what season 4 was doing. The proximity of construction and destruction. The way ordinary virtue can coexist with profound depravity. The way Dexter's admiration of Arthur is both completely comprehensible and completely wrong. He admires the wrong thing. He wants to learn the trick of managing both lives without acknowledging that Arthur's management has. Dexter has been using versions of that name for his own covert activities, of those small, quiet Easter eggs that only registers if you're paying close attention. Dexter adopts the name to get close to Arthur. Arthur has been using versions of that name for his own covert activities. The writers are making a point about how thoroughly Dexter has already become what he's studying, how completely the two men are mirrors of each other through something as mundane as a fake name. Season 3's Skinner, the secondary antagonist who operated in parallel to Miguel Prado, doesn't get much retrospective attention, largely because Miguel is so much more interesting. But the Skinner represents something the show kept returning to in its middle seasons. The idea that the world outside Dexter's carefully managed kill list is also generating monsters, and that Miami Metro's inability to catch them is a structural problem rather than an occasional failure. The Skinner operated for an extended period. Miguel operated for an extended period. Arthur Mitchell had been operating for 3 decades. In any real version of Miami's law enforcement apparatus, this pattern would suggest systemic failure. Dexter exploits that failure, and the show is honest about that exploitation. The aftermath of season 4 is where the show had to figure out what it was going to be without its best season behind it and without Clyde Phillips at the wheel. Season 5 gave the task to Chip Johannesson, and then seasons 6 through 8 fell to Scott Buck, whose tenure coincided with the show's critical decline. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because season 5 at least has more going for it than it's usually given credit for. Season 5 is built around grief. Dexter's grief, specifically, Rita's death, is not cleaned up quickly or conveniently, and the season takes the emotional wreckage seriously. He's a single father. He's lost the person who, more than anyone else in his life, saw something worth caring about in him and believed it unambiguously. And in processing that, he ends up in an alliance with Lumen Pierce, played by Julia Stiles. Lumen is a survivor of kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder at the hands of a group of powerful men who have been operating with impunity. She arrives at the story in pieces, and over the course of the season, she and Dexter dismantle the Grau. Lumen is one of the few people in the show's run who knows what Dexter is and loves him anyway, without reservation and without needing it to mean something transactional, oint. It's about being genuinely witnessed. Lumen is the only person in the show's run who knows what Dexter is and loves him anyway, without reservation and without needing it to mean something transactional. Julia Stiles was nominated for a Golden Globe for this performance, and I think the nomination was right. She does something very specific with Lumen. She makes the character's damage visible without ever making her fragile. The season 5 finale almost revealed Dexter to Deborah. They were behind a plastic curtain, and Deborah came within about 3 feet of seeing exactly what her brother was. The show pivoted away from it. Lumen and Dexter escaped, and it was the right call for where the show was in its run. But the near miss planted something that season 6 would eventually pay off. Season 5 closed with Lumen leaving. Her dark passenger, her need, her compulsion toward this kind of violence was gone once the men who harmed her were dead. She packed quietly and went back to her life. and Dexter let her go. It's one of the few genuinely hopeful endings the show ever offers. The idea that this darkness isn't always permanent, that some damage can be worked through rather than simply managed. And then season 6 arrived and things got complicated in a different way. Travis Marshall, played by Colin Hanks, staged elaborate tableaux referencing the Book of Revelation across Miami. The religious apocalyptic imagery was interesting on paper. There's something inherently compelling about the intersection of faith and violence, but the execution struggled. The bigger issue was the Professor Geller reveal. Edward James Olmos played Geller as Travis's spiritual mentor and co-conspirator for most of the season, until it was revealed that Geller was a hallucination. Travis had killed him long ago. The voice, the presence, the apparent dialogue, all of it was inside Travis's own mind. This is the structure of Fight Club, and audiences knew it. The reveal landed with more of a "yes, I thought so" than a genuine shock. Season 6's Rotten Tomatoes score dropped to 38%, and while there were individual strong episodes in it, the critical consensus was that something had loosened in the show's foundations. The season did, however, end with the moment the show had been building toward since the very first season. Deborah entered a church. She saw Dexter standing over Travis Marshall's body on a kill table in full kill outfit, and she understood exactly what she was looking at. Think about that for a second. 6 seasons of watching this character navigate the edges of discovery, and the revelation finally happened, not because of a piece of forensic evidence or a clever investigator, but because Deborah came looking for her brother at the wrong moment. It's appropriately mundane as an inciting incident. The most important secret in the show's history was exposed by bad timing. Season 7 dealt with the aftermath, and I think it's a better season than it sometimes gets credit for. Deborah's response to the revelation is not one thing. It cycles through horror, bargaining, attempted control, and eventually a kind of complicit participation that does more damage to her than anything Dexter ever directly put her through. Jennifer Carpenter is extraordinary in this season. The way she plays Deborah's deterioration, the way it's quiet and incremental rather than dramatic and obvious, is one of the best pieces of sustained acting in the show's run. Season 7 was the highest rated season overall, which feels almost counterintuitive given the critical trajectory. Approximately 6.1 to 6.2 million total weekly viewers across all platforms, live, on demand, and elsewhere. The show had built an audience that stayed loyal even as the critics were becoming more reserved. The Ukrainian mob antagonist, Izak Sierko, played by Ray Stevenson, was compelling in a way that the season's other mechanics weren't always. Sierko was intelligent and formidable and motivated by something the show treated with genuine seriousness. He loved Victor, the man Dexter killed in the premiere, and the revenge he pursued was born of that love rather than professional obligation. It gave the conflict a texture that could have been maudlin but wasn't. Hannah Mukay Yvonne Strahovski arrived in season 7 as a poisoner and killer who becomes Dexter's romantic interest. Their relationship has always struck me as the most unself-conscious the show ever offered. 2 killers, no pretense, no performance of normalcy required. Just 2 people who understand each other completely. The season finale was titled "Surprise Motherfucker." The Dokes line finally crystallized as an episode title 6 seasons after it was first spoken. In that finale, Deborah shot Maria Laguertu to protect Dexter from arrest. Laguertu had been quietly and patiently reopening the Bay Harbor butcher case all season, following the evidence with genuine investigative rigor. She got there, she was right, and Deborah killed her to keep the secret, which is the moment when the show's moral stakes shifted in a way they never fully recovered from. Deborah crossed a line that wasn't retrievable. The Deborah as moral center dynamic is something the show handled differently across its 7 seasons with her as a main character. In the early seasons, Deborah is the emotional North Star, the person whose clear-eyed decency and fundamental good faith serves as a constant reminder of what Dexter isn't. Her ambitions, her frustrations, her professional growth from patrol cop to homicide detective to lieutenant, all of it unfolds in a register that feels real and grounded and completely separate from the supernatural undertow of Dexter's storyline. By season 7, that's gone. Deborah knows. And the performance of the show's moral framework, that Miami Metro represents legitimate justice, that Deborah represents the values Dexter can only approximate, has to be abandoned. What takes its place is something more uncomfortable, two people who love each other navigating the practical and ethical consequences of one of them being a serial killer. The show handles this with more nuance than it gets credit for. The Hannah-Moo-Kay relationship in season 7 deserves more sustained attention than it typically receives in retrospective discussions of the show, partly because it's genuinely unusual for the series. For most of the run, Dexter's romantic relationships have required performance, the careful management of intimacy, the strategic revelations, the ongoing negotiation of what can and can't be shared. With Hannah, there's none of that. She's a poisoner and a killer. She's not going to be shocked by what he is. Their scenes together have a quality of ease, almost relaxation, that Dexter's other relationships don't. It's one of the more unexpectedly sweet things the show ever did, finding genuine warmth in a romance between two people who have both killed several people. The La Guertu thread across season 7 is the show being absolutely precise about something it's been gesturing at for 6 seasons. The idea that if a real detective actually applied real detective work to Dexter's history, the truth was findable. La Guertu found it. She followed the bloodslide, she cross-referenced the evidence. She applied exactly the kind of methodical, patient, investigative logic that in any real investigation would be standard procedure. She was right. She just wasn't fast enough or lucky enough or in a universe where the protagonist wasn't protected by narrative necessity. Season 8 is a complicated thing to talk about, and I want to try to do it without contempt because contempt isn't useful here. The show deserves more than that. A few structural facts first. Season 8 premiered on June 30th, 2013, a summer slot, which was unusual for the series. Seasons 1 through 7 had all premiered in September or October. The shift to summer was deliberate. Showtime wanted Season 8 to serve as a high-profile lead-in for their new series, Ray Donovan. This is entirely a business decision, and it's worth noting because it tells you something about the priorities at play as the show was closing out. Showtime officially confirmed on April 18, 2013, before Season 8 had even begun airing, that this would be the final season. So the audience knew going in. The farewell was announced in advance, which created a particular kind of anticipatory pressure on a writing room that was already working under scrutiny. Charlotte Rampling joined as Dr. Evelyn Vogel, a neuropsychiatrist with a connection to Dexter's origin story that the show had kept off the board until now. Vogel's revelation that she had helped Harry design the code itself, that she was present at the conceptual creation of the framework Dexter has been living by his entire adult life, was a genuinely interesting idea. It reframed everything. Harry didn't invent the code alone out of love and desperation. It was developed in consultation with a professional, a theorist, someone who studied psychopathy, and thought the code was the optimal management strategy for a particular kind of mind. That retroactively complicates every flashback in the series, every Harry vision, every invocation of the code as a moral inheritance. The season's main villain was the brain surgeon, and the arc didn't generate the momentum of its predecessors. Amy Garcia's character, Jamie Batistu, was elevated to main cast status for this season, which reflects the production's commitment to her character even as the season's larger machinery was struggling. Deborah was shot late in the season and suffered a fatal stroke. Dexter disconnected her from life support, and then he drove his boat into a hurricane and faked his own death, and the final scene revealed him alive in what appeared to be Oregon, working as a lumberjack in self-impo Deborah. One of the people who truly loved Dexter and whom he'd spent the entire series protecting was dead on and from any form of the life he'd built, because the cost of his existence had finally become undeniable to him. The last person who loved him, the person he'd spent the entire series protecting, was dead because of him. The final episode, Remember the Monsters, Horizon Solb, holds an IMDb user rating in the 4.6 to 4.9 range, depending on when you check. Season 8's Rotten Tomatoes score was 35%, the lowest of any season in the series. The finale was directed by Steve Schill, the same Steve Schill who won an Emmy for directing The Getaway 4 years earlier, which is a strange kind of symmetry. The critical and fan reaction was significant enough that it directly motivated the creation of New Blood years later. Clyde Phillips, the showrunner who had left after season 4, said on record that the reaction to the finale was part of what drew him back. Not to erase it exactly, but to give the character a more fitting conclusion. Michael C. Hall himself directed one episode this season, Every Silver Lining, making his directorial debut with the show he'd been the face of for 8 years. That's a meaningful thing to do in a final season, to step behind the camera and look at the world you've been inhabiting from the other side. There's a poignant quality to Season 8 even in its failures. It was trying to do something genuinely difficult, close out a story that had generated enormous goodwill, and then damage it significantly, while also giving the characters something approaching a resolution. The Vogel idea was good. The Hannah Muke arc, Dexter preparing to flee to Argentina with Harrison and Hannah, had warmth in it. The individual pieces weren't without merit. They just didn't cohere into something that felt worthy of what the show had been at its best. Season 8 also marked something quieter. Harry Morgan's hallucinatory appearances faded significantly. James Remar, who had been appearing in flashbacks and visions across 8 seasons, was stepping back, as if even the show's internal mythology was letting go of its own foundation. The Vogel mythology has always struck me as the Season 8 idea with the most unrealized potential. The concept that the code was designed rather than improvised, that Harry consulted a neuropsychiatrist who had specific theories about how to channel psychopathic impulses productively, is rich. It raises questions about consent. Dexter couldn't consent to being shaped this way as a child. About complicity, Vogel bears real moral responsibility for what Dexter became. And about the nature of the code itself. Is it ethical guidance, or is it management strategy for a liability? Those are genuinely interesting questions, and Season 8 only partially explores them. Charlotte Rampling's presence in the role gave it an authority and an intelligence that the scripts perhaps didn't always fully support. She made Vogel feel like someone with a real internal life and a real history. Someone whose relationship to what she'd done was complex rather than simply guilty or simply proud. The scenes between her and Hall have a quality of mutual recognition. Two people who both understand what Dexter is, approaching it from completely different directions. The finale's choice to exile Dexter rather than kill him was a decision that I think the writers made from a genuine place. They weren't trying to leave a door open for future storytelling. The lumberjack ending was meant to be the punishment, not death, but a kind of living death, cut off from everyone and everything, alone with the weight of what his existence had cost. The problem was execution rather than intention. The visual image of Dexter as a lumberjack in Oregon, with his beard and his flannel, landed as unintentionally comic rather than devastatingly bleak. The emotional logic was sound. The presentation didn't serve it. Season 8 also represents the end of something in terms of the show's relationship with Miami Metro as an institution. From Season 1, the department had been a constant, the structure Dexter navigated, the community he inhabited, the procedural texture of his double life. Season 8 kept the institution technically in frame, but it never felt alive in the way it had in the earlier seasons. The departure of LaGuertu, the changed dynamic between Deborah and Dexter, The way the season's attention was divided across too many plot lines, all of it loosened the show's grip on the thing that had made it feel genuinely located in a real world. Let's talk about New Blood, because it was a genuinely interesting piece of franchise management as much as it was a television event. The announcement came in October 2020, roughly 7 years after the original series ended. Showtime wanted more Dexter, and crucially, they brought Clyde Phillips back to do it. The showrunner from seasons 1 through 4, the person who had overseen the golden era and had then been absent for the seasons that eroded the show's legacy, was returning specifically to give the character the closing chapter he hadn't received. That's a meaningful decision. It signals an acknowledgement, however diplomatic, of what the show had been without him. New Blood was set in the fictional small town of Iron Lake, New York, as we've discussed, filmed in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts. And the geography is doing work in the story, not just as a backdrop. Dexter has been in exile for a decade. He's been Jim Lindsay, the quiet, outdoorsy guy in a small town, living a life stripped of almost everything that defined the original series. No Miami, no Miami Metro, no elaborate kill room, no plastic wrap. He's been trying to be nothing, and the show watches that attempt and asks, is this sustainable? The answer is no, but the asking is genuinely interesting. Jack Alcott played the adult Harrison, Dexter's son, now a teenager who has come looking for his father. The father-son dynamic was the emotional engine of New Blood in the way the Deborah relationship had been the engine of the original series. Harrison shows signs of inheriting what Dexter inherited, the compulsion, the capacity for violence, the pull toward the dark passenger, and the question the season builds toward is whether the cycle can be broken, or whether Dexter is going to transmit his damage forward one more generation. The season's main villain was Kurt Caldwell, played by Clancy Brown, who is very good at this kind of thing. A small-town power figure with something hidden and terrible underneath, he was a credible threat in a context that required Dexter to operate more carefully than he ever had in Miami. John Lithgow returned as a hallucination of Arthur Mitchell. Jennifer Carpenter appeared as a hallucination of Deborah. New Blood is quite committed to the idea that Dexter is haunted in the most literal psychological sense, that the people he's lost and the people he's killed occupy the same internal space, and that there's no clean separation between guilt and memory. New Blood became the most watched series in Showtime's history, drawing approximately 8 million viewers per episode across all platforms. That number tells you how much appetite there was for the show's return, and how effectively the marketing communicated that this was a genuine revival rather than a cynical cash grab. The finale had Harrison shoot Dexter. It was a decision that divided the audience quite sharply. Some found it a fitting and thematically coherent conclusion, a son ending the cycle by ending his father. Others felt it was too bleak, too final, a different kind of unsatisfying ending rather than a correction of the previous one. I sit somewhere in the middle on it. The logic was sound. The execution was earned by the season that preceded it. And yet something about it felt more conclusive than the franchise was actually willing to be. Because Dexter Resurrections subsequently revealed that Dexter had survived, resuscitated, and returned to life, setting up the next chapter. New Blood was filmed under COVID-19 protocols throughout its production, which added considerable logistical challenge to an already demanding location shoot in winter in Massachusetts. It also used the 21.9 ultra-wide aspect ratio that would become a franchise standard going forward, the cinematic letterboxed look that was a deliberate step away from television aesthetics towards something more prestige adjacent. I want to say something about Jack Alcott's performance as adult Harrison, because it doesn't come up as often as it should in discussions of what New Blood was doing well. He was given the task of playing a character we had watched as an infant and a toddler, now fully grown, carrying the weight of a childhood defined by his mother's murder and his father's absence. There's no shortcut for that. You can't borrow from a prior performance. You have to build it from scratch. Alcott made Harrison feel continuous, like someone who had genuinely been formed by those specific circumstances without making him a simplified version of his father. Harrison is not Dexter light. He has his own anger, his own grief, his own version of the inheritance. The New Blood flashback structure, Dexter as Jim Lindsay, living without kills, living without the ritual, is doing something quite specific about the show's mythology. It's testing the proposition that the code could be suspended, that if Dexter simply removed himself from the environment that activated the compulsion could go to Clancy Brown as Kurt Caldwell, a wealthy truck stop owner and local power figure with a very dark secret, is exactly the kind of antagonist New Blood needed. Something more complicated than inevitability. Clancy Brown as Kurt Caldwell, a wealthy hunting camp owner and local power figure with a very dark secret, is exactly the kind of antagonist New Blood needed. He's a man who has shaped a community around his money and his personality, who is genuinely respected by people who don't know what he does. The parallel to Arthur Mitchell is intentional and pointed. Another apparently functional, apparently contributing member of society who is anything but. Brown plays it with the specific combination of affability and menace that makes this character type so compelling to watch. Since we're bringing the timeline fully up to date, let's talk about where the franchise went after New Blood. Dexter. Original Sin was a prequel series set in 1991 Miami, following a young Dexter's transition from forensic student to vigilante killer. It was specifically about how the code was established, not as a finished framework handed down by Harry, but as something developing in real time through early experiments and early mistakes and the presence of Harry as an active and present guide. It aired beginning December 13, 2024 on Paramount Plus with Showtime. The casting was interesting. Patrick Gibson played young Dexter, and the production made a specific decision that I found quite elegant. Michael C. Hall returned not to play Dexter, but to voice his internal monologue. So you have a younger actor embodying the character physically while Hall provides the inner voice, the familiar narration, the recognizable rhythm of how Dexter thinks. It creates a kind of continuity across the generations of the performance that's more sophisticated than simply recasting the role. Christian Slater played young Harry Morgan. Harry as an active presence, as a father still in the process of shaping rather than an idealized memory, is quite different from what James Remar gave us in the original series. And that difference is part of the point. Molly Brown played young Debru Morgan. Christina Milian played young Maria Laguertu. James Martinez played young Angel Batistu. Alex Shimizu played young Musuku. Sarah Michelle Gellar appeared as the chief of forensics, an interesting piece of casting that drew attention and I think used the cultural associations Gellar carries rather well. Original Sin was, by most accounts, a decent piece of television, not as immediately compelling as the original series at its best, but a thoughtful expansion of the mythology with strong performances and a genuine interest in what the 1991 setting could do. Dexter learning his craft, Miami Metro in an earlier era, Harry as a complicated figure of ongoing moral ambiguity rather than a posthumous ideal. And then, in August 2025, despite a prior renewal announcement, Original Sin was officially canceled. The timing was awkward. The announcement of the cancellation came after viewers had already been told a second season way. Dexter Resurrection premiered July 11, 2025, and set the record for the most streamed premiere of any Showtime show on Paramount Plus. The prequel series is set years before New Blood, Dexter living in 1990s Miami, coming into his code under Harry, with Deborah and Angel Batistu both involved in the story RD for Paramount Plus' most streamed premiere. The sequel series picked up from New Blood's aftermath. Dexter revived, making his way to New York City with Harrison and Angel Batistu both involved in the story. Uma Thurman and Peter Dinklage joined the main ensemble, which tells you something about the scale of ambition the production was operating at. David Zayas Angel Batestu remains one of the most consistent presences in the entire franchise, appearing across the original series, New Blood, and now Resurrection. Resurrection was renewed for a second season in October 2025, with 3 seasons planned in total for the revival arc. A Trinity Killer prequel series has also been announced, separate from Resurrection, which would follow Arthur Mitchell's early life and his beginning kills in the 1970s. That's a genuinely intriguing prospect, Arthur Mitchell as a young man before the mask was fully formed, before the decades of double life had become routine. John Lithgow is a hard act to follow for any casting director, but the idea itself has real potential. The full franchise now spans 126 total episodes across 4 series. The original 96-episode run, plus 10 for New Blood, 10 for Original Sin, and 10 for Resurrection's first season. It's a substantial body of work built around a single character and a single moral question, and the fact that it's still expanding, still finding things to say about who Dexter Morgan is and where he came from and what he leaves behind is, I think, a testament to how much the original idea contained. The Original Sin timeline, 1991 Miami, is a genuinely interesting creative choice in terms of what it allows the show to do. 1991 Miami was at the height of the city's reputation for vice and violence. The cocaine trade, the gang activity, the specific cultural energy of that period, all of it creates a context for Dexter's early kills that the present-day setting of the original series never had. Harry, as an active detective in that environment rather than a memory, is a significantly more dangerous character. He's doing real police work in a genuinely dangerous city, and his decision to teach Dexter to kill is made in that context rather than in the more comfortable, retrospective framing of the original series flashbacks. Christian Slater as Harry Morgan is interesting for exactly this reason. Slater carries a specific kind of charisma. There's always something slightly dangerous about him, something that might go either way, and that quality serves a version of Harry who is still making decisions rather than having made them. The Harry of the original series is a figure who is already fixed, already finished, already a ghost. Slater's Harry is a man in process. The cancellation of Original Sin before its second season is disappointing primarily because the 1991 setting still had things to explore that the first season only began to open up. The mythology of how Dexter became Dexter, not just the code, but the first experiments, the first decisions, the specific texture of those early years, had room for more than 10 episodes. The business and platform reasons for the cancellation are what they are. Arthur Mitchell, at the beginning of his killing life, before the decades of maintenance, before the family, before the 4 walls volunteer work, is a character we have only briefly seen in flashback and can only partially infer from what John Lithgow showed us in Season 4 Ing life, before the decades of maintenance, before the family, before the 4 walls volunteer work, is a character we haven't seen and can only partially infer from what John Lithgow showed us in Season 4. The early Trinity is a real creative opportunity, and it will require a performance that can stand in conversation with Lithgow's work without being crushed by comparison. Now let's slow right down, because this is a section I suspect some of you have been waiting for. The Easter eggs, the continuity details, the things that reward repeated watching and close attention. Let's start with the Sabre printer, because it remains one of my favorite things about this show's production history. The Dunder Mifflin Paper Company was acquired by a fictional tech company called Sabre in the office, and a Sabre-branded printer turned up as a background prop in a Season 6 Dexter scene, just sitting there. Nobody commented on it. It wasn't relevant to anything. Someone in the props department placed it and waited for someone to notice. This is the purest form of Easter egg, not a callback, not a continuity detail, just a private joke between the production and its most attentive viewers. Let's talk about Dexter's kill ritual, because there's a detail embedded in it that I've always found quietly fascinating. The ritual, the plastic wrap, the specific table arrangement, the tools laid out in order, mirrors surgical procedure. Not coincidentally, Dexter works with forensic evidence every day. He knows exactly how medical procedures are structured, how they're documented, how they look to outside observers. His kills are staged to be, and Dexter keeps a trophy slide from many of his victims, a drop of blood preserved on a glass slide and stored in a box. Hiding the ritual in plain sight of analyzing bloodstain patterns is exactly what Dexter's job requires him to do at crime scenes. Dexter keeps a trophy slide from each victim, a drop of blood preserved on a glass slide and stored in a box. This is forensic evidence collection. It is exactly what his job requires him to do at crime scenes. He is keeping evidence of his murders in the same format as evidence of other people's murders, in the same kind of facility, under the same roof. The audacity of that is something I find genuinely delightful every time I think about it. Not because it's clever plotting, but because it's psychologically consistent. Dexter doesn't hide. He duplicates. The Season 7 finale title, "Surprise, Motherfucker," as we've discussed, was a direct lift from Dokes' famous Season 1 line, planted 6 seasons before it became an episode title. But the Dokes callback goes slightly further than that. The episode number, the context, the way the title lands on the circumstances of that finale, La Guertu closing in, Deborah forced to act, all of it echoes the original dynamic. Dokes said it to Dexter when he caught him off guard. The finale title says it to the audience because the show is acknowledging that La Guerta's story ended where Dokes' ended, with someone knowing the truth and that truth being the thing that kills them. Some quieter continuity. Cody Bennett, Rita's son, was played by Daniel Goldman in Season 1 and then recast with Preston Bailey for subsequent seasons. The recast was never addressed within the show. Most viewers who watched the seasons in sequence probably adjusted without noticing. That's 5 actors across the run of the character, which is fairly standard for a character who ages from infant to adult across a franchise. OTT took over for New Blood and Resurrection as the adult version. That's 4 actors across the run of the character, which is fairly standard for a character who ages from infant to adult across a franchise. The title sequence detail that I particularly love is this. The sequence was never designed to be disturbing. The director approached it as a morning routine video, and the brief was purely practical. Show Dexter getting ready for the day. The egg crack is just an egg crack. The orange juice is just orange juice. The floss is just floss. The sinister reinterpretation is entirely viewer-generated based on context, which means every time the sequence made you feel something uncomfortable, that feeling came from you, not from the sequence itself. In terms of the expanded universe, a few things worth knowing. Jeff Lindsay himself wrote the 2013 Marvel Comics series based on the character Along Dexter. Early Cuts premiered as a short-form animated web series on October 25, 2009, and featured Michael C. Hall /, which is the kind of thing that exists and that I mention without further comment. The animated web series Dexter, Early Cuts, premiered on Showtime's website on October 25, 2009, and featured Michael C. Hall voicing Dexter. It depicted some of his early kills under Harry's Code and served as supplementary content ahead of Season 4. Its canon status has been partially complicated by Original Sin, which now occupies some of the same timeline territory with different events. At one point, Dexter was the most rented DVD box set in Netflix's entire history. That's a detail that places the show's cultural footprint in a specific moment. The pre-streaming era, when physical media was still the dominant way to catch up on television, and when a show like this could sit at the top of the rental queue for months. The show received a Peabody Award. That's the most prestigious honor in American broadcasting, and Dexter sits on that list, alongside documentary journalism and cultural programming of the highest order. It's worth pausing on that. A show about a serial killer who the audience roots for sits on the Peabody list. That's not an accident. It's a recognition of what the show did at its best, which was use genre entertainment to ask questions about justice, empathy, and the moral compromises we're willing to tolerate in the people we care about. Michael C. Hall received 5 Emmy nominations for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series. He was nominated in 5 separate years, which is a statement about consistent excellence across a long run. And yet he never won. Emmy voting history is full of these anomalies, performances that were clearly the best of their year, passed over for various reasons. Hall's 5 nominations without a win is one of the more notable footnotes in the awards history of his era. The series as a whole was nominated for Outstanding Drama Series 4 consecutive times, seasons 2 through 5, making it the first Showtime drama to receive that Emmy nomination at all, 4 consecutive years. That record of sustained recognition is, I think, the more meaningful number than any individual award. And from there, the whole franchise has accumulated over 100 award nominations and approximately 32 wins across major and minor ceremonies. That's the accumulated weight of people recognizing something of merit in this show, over and over across its run. The LAA's a forensic evidence box. It's actually a custom wooden trophy case Dexter keeps hidden in his air conditioner. Not the kind of standardized evidence container he handles at crime scenes routinely. A rating at its highest level is substantial. The blood slide box itself is worth a brief detour. As a forensic evidence box, it's entirely ordinary, the kind of thing Dexter handles at crime scenes routinely. The slides inside it are the trophies. Each one represents a life taken, a case closed in a way Miami Metro will never know about. The slides are preserved, labeled, arranged. This is not the behavior of someone who has lost control. It's the behavior of someone who is managing something with extreme care. That carefulness, the meticulous archiving of murder, is one of the show's most consistent character notes. Dexter doesn't rage, he organizes. The Saber printer Easter egg sits in a category that the show populated more than once. Dexter was made in an era when television productions were increasingly self-aware about the networks of references and callbacks and cross-series nods that attentive viewers were cataloging. The prop departments and art departments on shows like this were populated by people who watched a lot of television and genuinely enjoyed the game of planting things for others to find. The Saber printer is the most famous example in Dexter's case, but it's not an isolated decision. It's a symptom of a production culture that valued that kind of playfulness. The Dexter, early cuts animated web series, is a piece of franchise history that is genuinely underappreciated. It predates the modern streaming era habit of companion digital content by several years. Premiered in 2009 on Showtime's website featuring Hall's voice, it was an attempt to extend the mythology into a different format and a different distribution context. The animation style was distinct from the show's visual language in a way that acknowledged the different register rather than trying to replicate it. Its canon status has been partially complicated by Original Sin, which now offers a live-action version of some of the same early career territory. But as a document of how the franchise thought about its own expanded universe, it's interesting to revisit. Jeff Lindsay himself writing the Marvel Comics series is another piece of franchise expansion that tends to get forgotten. The novelist adapting his own character for a different medium, comics, while the television series was still running, is a slightly unusual arrangement. It meant the character existed in at least 3 distinct versions simultaneously. The original novels, the television series, and the comics, each with its own continuity, its own interpretation of what Dexter was and how he functioned. Lindsay writing Dexter Down Under as a follow-up took the character to Australia, which represents the kind of geographical flexibility that a comics format allows in ways that a television production with a specific setting doesn't. The record of Dexter as the most rented DVD box set in Netflix's history is the kind of fact that places the show precisely in its era. Netflix in the mid-2000s and early 2010s was still primarily a mail-order DVD service. The streaming pivot was coming, but it hadn't happened yet. And Dexter was at the top of that queue, which meant it was reaching an enormous number of people who weren't Showtime subscribers, who were discovering it through physical media, who were working through the seasons one disc at a time. That's a very specific viewing experience, and it helped build the show's audience in a particular way, slowly, deliberately, episode by episode, with natural stopping points between discs that allowed the mythology to settle. The Peabody Award in particular feels worth sitting with for a moment. The Peabody Board doesn't recognize shows for being popular or for being technically accomplished. It recognizes them for excellence in broadcasting and for contributing something meaningful to public discourse. The fact that Dexter received that recognition places it explicitly in a tradition of television that matters, that uses the genre framework of entertainment to do something more than entertain, to ask questions, to put pressure on assumptions, to ask whether the categories we use to judge people, good, bad, innocent, guilty, are as clean as we need them to be. The answer, of course, is that they aren't. And Dexter spent 8 seasons and then several more making that case with varying degrees of success and consistency, and the best of it was genuinely excellent, and the worst of it was still trying to do something worth doing. Let me take a moment to talk about the code more carefully, because it's the central idea of the show, and it's worth treating with some precision. The Code of Harry, as established in Season 1, and refined through subsequent seasons, has 2 primary rules. Dexter must never be caught, and he may only kill people who are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, murderers who have escaped or will escape the justice system. Both rules are instrumental rather than moral. They're not there because killing innocent people is wrong. They're there because killing innocent people would be bad for Dexter's continued operation. The code is not an ethical system. It's a risk management framework that happens to produce results that look ethical from the outside. This distinction matters because the show is sometimes read as endorsing the code, as suggesting that Dexter is, in some meaningful sense, a hero. I don't think that's right, and I don't think the show at its best thought so either. What the show at its best believed was that the code was the best available option given an irreversible situation. A child had been formed a certain way, the formation couldn't be undone, and the code was the least harmful management of that situation that Harry could devise. It's not a moral framework, it's harm reduction. The Vogel revelation in Season 8 makes this explicit. The code was designed. It was a professional response to a clinical problem. Vogel's training in neuropsychiatry informed what Harry chose to do, and her involvement retrospectively drains the code of the paternal warmth that Dexter had always understood it to carry. It wasn't a father's love shaped into rules. It was a clinician's protocol, endorsed by a father. That's a significant difference. And yet, and this is what makes the show genuinely interesting, the people who operated under the code mostly did so with real feeling. Harry loved Dexter. Whatever the code's origins, the love was real. Deborah eventually accepted the framework with enormous moral cost because she loved Dexter. Even Dexter's own application of the code was infused with something that looked like genuine value. The satisfaction of removing someone who had harmed people, the relief of knowing that a specific child or family was now safer. The show refused to fully separate the clinical from the emotional, and that refusal is where its most interesting moments live. There's a broader conversation about what Dexter did to television that feels worth acknowledging even briefly. Before Dexter, the anti-hero tradition in American television was established primarily through Dexter was different in one specific way. His victims were, by his code, supposed to be worse than him, able things, and whom audiences watch with a complicated mixture of fascination, repulsion, and reluctant admiration. Dexter was different in one specific way. His victims were, by definition, worse than him. The code meant the audience never had to fully confront the moral problem of rooting for a killer, because the people he killed were also killers, usually of people who couldn't defend themselves. The show managed the audience's discomfort by giving them a continuous supply of people worse than Dexter. That management was sophisticated and slightly manipulative, and the show knew it. In its better seasons, it periodically unsettled that comfort, showing Dexter's kills as genuinely violent, showing the collateral damage of his existence to the people around him, refusing to let the vigilante framework fully neutralize the moral question. The character of James Dokes served partly as a structural challenge to the comfort. Here was someone who knew what Dexter was and refused to let it be okay, and the show killed him before he could make the audience too uncomfortable. What Dexter left behind culturally was a template. The good monster anti-hero, the killer who follows rules, the protagonist whose violence is bounded by a code that allows audiences to invest without fully endorsing. You can trace lines from Dexter to subsequent television, to certain strands of prestige drama, to the specific flavor of morally ambiguous protagonists that became ubiquitous in the years after. It's not the only influence and it's not the primary one, but it's a real one. The show also, and this is worth stating plainly, did something important for Showtime as a network. Before Dexter, Showtime had produced good work but hadn't produced anything that defined a cultural moment. Dexter defined several of them: the Season 1 premiere, the Season 4 finale, the Season 6 cliffhanger, the Season 8 finale, even in its failure. The show put Showtime in a conversation it hadn't previously been in, and that conversation eventually produced the network's willingness to invest in subsequent prestige work at the same level. The Tranquillity killer prequel announced for the coming years is the piece of franchise expansion that I find myself thinking about most. Arthur Mitchell, in his youth, before the decades of double life had calcified into routine, before the family of four and the four walls and the everything, is a character we know primarily through implication. Lithgow's Arthur was meticulous because he had had 30 years to become meticulous. The early Arthur would have been learning, making mistakes, refining the methodology. The show has an opportunity to do for Arthur what Original Sin was doing for Dexter: show the formation, not the formed product. The 3 seasons planned for Resurrection, with the possibility of more, suggest the franchise is thinking about this as a sustained ongoing enterprise rather than a limited conclusion. Dexter revived in New York, with Harrison and Batistu and Uma Thurman and Peter Dinklage, is genuinely a different configuration than anything the franchise has previously attempted. The original series was Miami Metro and Dexter's Double Life. New Blood was isolation and inheritance. Resurrection is apparently something else, something urban and ensemble-focused and operating on a larger scale. Whether that works and what it means for the character's arc is something we'll find out in the coming seasons. But the fact that the franchise is still generating genuine anticipation, that news of new casting or new seasons produces real response rather than resigned acceptance, tells you that the core idea retains its pull, a man with a code trying to live inside it. The premise is as simple as it ever was and as endlessly complicated. One of the things I've always appreciated about the show's better seasons is how carefully they tracked the internal logic of Dexter's psychology. The flashbacks weren't decorative, they weren't there to provide exposition or to slow things down between kill sequences. They were argumentative. Each flashback was making a claim about who Dexter was and how he got there, and the accumulated weight of those claims was the show's actual subject matter. Harry Morgan in the flashbacks is consistently presented as a man making an impossible decision under impossible circumstances. He finds a traumatized child sitting in his murdered mother's blood. The child is young enough that the trauma may be processable or may not. Harry takes him home, he adopts him, he raises him. And as the child grows, Harry begins to see what's there beneath the surface: the compulsions, the violence, adjacent thinking, the flat affect around things that should provoke emotion, and he makes his choice. He doesn't send Dexter to therapy. He doesn't place him in a specialized residential program. He teaches him to kill. The Harry visions, the way Harry appears to Dexter throughout the series as a kind of internal interlocutor, a conscience or an argument or simply a habit of thought, are one of the show's most formally interesting devices. James Remar playing Harry in these sequences had the task of being simultaneously present and absent, simultaneously a character and a mechanism. The Harry in Dexter's head is not the Harry who was. He's a construct, Dexter's rationalization of the code, personified. When Harry pushes back on Dexter's decisions in those vision sequences, Dexter is pushing back on himself. That's what the show always understood about internal conflict. It sounds like other people. Musuku, Batistu, Quinn, Laguertu. The Miami Metro Ensemble spent 8 seasons being underserved by storylines that were at times genuinely interesting and at times simply functional. The show had a tendency to use them as procedural texture, as the human context that made Dexter's double life feel plausible, without always giving them full arcs that existed for their own sake rather than for the sake of Dexter's story. David Zayas' Batistu is the clearest example of a character who had everything required for a richer arc and was given limited room. His marriage to Laguertu, his career ambitions, his relationship with his sister Jamie, his friendship with Dexter that was genuine and uncoerced, all of that was real material. The show used it as texture. Batista's presence across the original series, New Blood, and now Resurrection, represents a kind of institutional continuity. He is the most persistent presence in the franchise after Michael C. Hall himself. And that continuity carries an implicit argument that Miami Metro was more than backdrop, that the community Dexter inhabited mattered, that the relationships he managed around his secret had real weight on both sides. Quinn's arc across the series, from slightly morally gray detective to something closer to straightforwardly decent, is one of those quiet progressions that the show managed better than it gets credit for. He began as a potential threat, someone who might find the truth, someone whose loyalties were genuinely uncertain. He ended as the person you most wanted to be okay. The Deborah Quinn relationship carried a warmth and a sadness that the show deployed sparingly but well, and Desmond Harrington's performance across the later seasons is significantly better than the character's modest reputation might suggest. And Laguertu, as we've covered, was the most morally coherent detective in the building by the end, and the show killed her for it. And that's how it goes with a show that's been running in some form since 2006 across 2 series and 106 episodes, and more cast changes and creative transitions than most franchises survive, die out together. But that's how it goes with a show that's been running in some form since 2006 across 4 series and 126 episodes, and more cast changes and creative transitions than most franchises survive. I want to end on something that's been sitting quietly at the back of my mind for most of this video, which is the question of why any of this matters. Why 200 facts? Why the Easter eggs and the production details and the casting footnotes and the aspect ratio changes? Because on one level, of course, it doesn't matter at all. It's television, it's entertainment. It's a show about a serial killer who makes breakfast in an unsettling way and keeps blood on a glass slide. And yet, here we are. I think what Dexter understood at its best, which was genuinely brilliant, was that the details are not separate from the story. The blood slide collection is not a quirk. The kill ritual is not a plot device. The code is not just a plot mechanism for keeping the protagonist out of prison. These are all expressions of something real about the character, a man who's trying to be something other than what he is, using the only frameworks available to him. Harry gave him rules. Those rules became identity. That identity became the only legible form of love he knew how to give. The show asked with genuine seriousness whether that was enough, whether a code could substitute for a conscience, whether the people who loved Dexter, Rita, Deborah, Lumen, Harrison were loving him or were loving the performance, whether there was a difference. And it didn't answer that cleanly because it knew the answer was no, and it knew that no was complicated. The later seasons lost some of that precision. The finale lost most of it. And new blood tried to find it again with partial success. The franchise is still going, which means the question is still being asked. That feels right to me. It's not a question that deserves a clean resolution. In a future video, I'd love to spend proper time on the Harry Morgan mythology specifically, the gap between the Harry of the flashbacks and the Harry of Dexter's imagination, and what that gap tells us about memory and guilt. There's also a Season 4 deep dive I've been putting off because I want to do it properly, and it deserves at least 2 hours of careful attention. And if the Tri-Nighty Killer prequel series gets moving, we'll absolutely spend time with that. The idea of Arthur Mitchell in his 20s and 30s, before the decades of double life had become routine, is genuinely fascinating. But that's for another evening. Tonight, we've covered 200 things about a show that rewards close attention, and now it's time to let it settle. Wherever you are tonight, I hope it's comfortable. I hope the room is quiet. I hope you got somewhere warm to be, and that you can let whatever's been running through your mind today slow down and go somewhere easier. It was, as always, a genuine pleasure to spend the evening with you. Sweet dreams.